Hey, this is Mr. Janes. In this video, we'll be talking about outliers and the effect of skew. What is an outlier and what happens after we add an outlier to a data set to all the different statistics such as mean, median, standard deviation, all of those. Before we begin, we'll need to do an example problem to get an idea of what we're talking about here. So let's look at this. Below is a dot plot with 10 data points. Calculate all the one variable statistics. Add two extra data points as 16 and 27. Then recalculate all the statistics. Finally, determine which statistics change and which ones remain the same. So let's start at the beginning. Here's a dot plot of 10 data points. And first, it asks us to calculate all of the one variable statistics. Well, what are all the one variable statistics we know? Well, we actually know how to find all of the one variable statistics I've listed here. We know how to find n is just the number of data points, the number of observations, the mean or the average, the standard deviation, the minimum or the smallest value. We've got Q1, the median or the middle value, Q3, the maximum or the greatest value, the IQR, the interquartile range. Remember, we found that by doing Q3 minus Q1, and the range. That's going to be the maximum subtract the minimum. Now you can calculate all of these on your own, except for the standard deviation. I'm going to do that for you. I used an online calculator, putting in all my data points, 29, 29, 30, 30, 30, 31, 31, 31, 32, 32. And using that online calculator, I figured out my standard deviation is 1.08. 1.08. But other than that, you can calculate the other ones. So pause here and fill in all these other data points. By this point, you should be a pro at finding all of these one variable statistics. Pause now. The answers will be up in 3, 2, 1. And here we are. Seems like there were 10 data points, so n is 10. The mean or the average was 30.5. We knew the standard deviation was 1.08. The smallest value was 29. The first quartile was 30. The median was 30.5. The third quartile was 31. The maximum was 32. The IQR, remember that's Q3, 31 minus Q1, which is 30. So 31 minus 30 is 1. And the range, remember that's the maximum, 32, minus the minimum, 29. So 32 minus 29 gives me a range of 3. Next, the directions ask me to add two extra data points at 16 and 27. So here's one data point at 16 right here. And here's one data point at 27 right here. All right. Then recalculate all the statistics. So what we'll need to do is find all of these statistics like we did before, but instead of having a list of just 10 numbers, we're going to have a list of 12 numbers. So n is now, well, we have 12 data points because we've added 16 and 27. So on a scrap piece of paper, off on the margin again, go back and try and find all of these different one variable statistics. Again, I'll tell you the standard deviation. Using an online calculator, I got a standard deviation now of 4.33 after doing this new data set of 12 points. But you guys can take a second and find all the other ones. So pause the video here and try and calculate all these other one variable statistics for this new data set of 12 points, including 16 and 27. Pause the video now. The answers will be up in 3, 2, 1. And here we are. So we know that the number of data points is now 12. The mean changed a little bit to 29. The standard deviation changed a whole bunch to 4.33. The minimum is now 16. First quartile is 29. Median changed slightly to 30. The third quartile is still 31. The maximum is still 32. The interquartile range, remember that's 31 minus 29, or Q3 minus Q1, increased a little bit to 2. And the range, again, that's the maximum minus the minimum, jumped up to 16. Now, before I forget here, we did leave off one of our statistics. We left off the mode, the most common value, off of both before we added those extra points and after. But fortunately, the most common points were tied at 30 and 31, both before we added those extra data at 16 and 27 and after. So really, the mode didn't change at all. Which brings us to the last part. Finally, determine which statistics changed and which remain the same. So let's just highlight which ones changed the most and go from there. Well, looking at this, it looks like probably the biggest change was in our range. It jumped from 3 all the way up to 16. There's a huge jump there. There's also a pretty decent change in the standard deviation. It went from 1.8 to 4.33. And our mean changed a little bit as well, right? Our average from 30.5 to 29. Well, it changed a little less. Well, it looks like the median stayed pretty much the same. I mean, it was 30.5 before, and now it's 30, so that's not that much of a change. The IQR didn't change that much either. Right? It went from 1 to 2, which increased by 1, so that wasn't that much of a change. And actually, one of these things didn't even change at all. The mode, or the most common value, didn't change before and after we added those extra points. It was 30 and 31 both times. Let's record some of those observations at the bottom of the paper where it says the effect of skew. It asks, what effect does skew and outliers have on basic statistics, and why is there an effect? So I'll start with the mode. Recall that the mode didn't change at all when we added those 2 extra points. The mode was still 30 and 31 both times. So there's no effect from outliers and skew. But why is that? Well, remember, the mode only depends on the most frequent or common value, and adding a couple outliers to the data isn't going to change that most frequent or common value, so the mode stays exactly the same. On the other hand, the median had a very slight effect. Remember, it changed from 30.5 down to 30 when we added those 2 extra data points. Now, why the slight change? Well, the median only depends on the middle number. So adding those outliers, or that skew, might change which number is the middle number, but not by that much. So skew has a very, very slight effect on the median. But adding those extra data points does have a much larger effect on the mean. Remember, the mean changed from 30.5 to 29, the biggest change in any of those measures of center. Remember, to find the mean or the average of a data set, you have to add up all the data points and divide by the number of data points that you have. And so even adding 1 or 2 outliers into that data can really mess up your average. So there's a large effect. So out of our 3 measures of center, it seems like outliers and skew have the largest effect on the mean, some effect on the median, and almost no effect on the mode. But what about our measures of spread? What about range, IQR, and standard deviation? Well, in case you've forgotten, remember that when we added those 2 extra data points, our range blew up from 3, increasing all the way up to 16. So when you add outliers, there's a very large effect on the range. Now that's because the range depends only on the maximum and the minimum values, which just happen to be the outliers themselves. So if you add a very, very large value or a very small value to your data set, it's going to have a huge effect on the range. On the other hand, there was a much smaller effect on the IQR, the interquartile range. That's because the IQR is a lot like the median. It only depends on Q1 and Q3. Now adding those extra data points might move around a little bit, which data point is quartile 1, quartile 3, but it's not going to push it by a whole bunch. Now standard deviation kind of fell in the middle of the effect on range and IQR. It's not as big as range, but it's not as immune to outliers as IQR is. There was a decent effect on the standard deviation. Recall it changed from 1 point something to about 4 point something. A pretty decent effect. Now that's due to the fact that, like the mean, standard deviation depends on all the data points. With the mean, you've got to add up all the data points and divide it by the number you have. The standard deviation has a similar but more complicated formula that we haven't really gotten into, but trust me on this one, because it takes into account all the different data points, there's a large effect from adding those 2 extra outliers or skew. So it seems like of our 3 measures of spread, adding those 2 extra data points had the biggest effect on the range and the smallest effect on the IQR, with standard deviation kind of somewhere in the middle.